After years of anticipation, the Switch 2 is finally here. And I've been using the Nintendo Switch 2 non-stop since it launched 1 week ago. And so in today's video, I'm gonna give you guys an initial 1-week review, my first impressions of the Nintendo Switch 2. When I say that I've been playing this nonstop for the last week, I mean I've been playing this nonstop for the last week. I've been playing Nintendo, filming videos, sending them to my editor, shout out to you, Tim, and then playing more Nintendo, and then hanging out with my family, playing Nintendo with my family, and then playing more Nintendo by myself when they go to bed. Is that sad? A little bit. But to be fair, I am reviewing this console, so I want to give you guys my honest feedback on the Nintendo Switch 2 after 1 week of heavy use. Really quick though, I just want to remind you guys that I am giving away a brand new Nintendo Switch 2, the Mario Kart bundle. This is actually my second Switch. This is the one that I got on launch day. This one showed up a couple days later from pre-order. I'm giving this away to one of you guys. Hopefully you don't have a Nintendo Switch 2, but if you do, maybe give it to a friend or get rid of it. I don't know what you want to do with it. But either way, all you need to do to enter to win this Mario Kart bundle of the Nintendo Switch 2 is to collect all of the core badges this month. So Core is a company that I work with. It's a really cool way to connect with creators and have communities outside of YouTube, which I'm really excited about. And I can actually run giveaways through Core, so that's what I'm doing. There are 3 badges to collect this month. The first one went live when I first unboxed this Nintendo Switch 2, so check out that video linked in the description below to grab that badge. The second badge is live now, and the third badge is coming up in an upcoming video, so stay tuned for that. But if you're entering the giveaway, good luck on winning the Nintendo Switch 2 for yourself. I hope you get it, and I hope you enjoy it. But let's talk about my experience. The Nintendo Switch 2. This is a console that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. When the first Nintendo Switch released back in 2017, I grabbed one around launch day. I think I pre-ordered it and it came in a day or two after launch, and I played it all the time. Now, I didn't have this tech channel at the time. I was still primarily working on my main channel, my sneaker channel, which by the way, if you guys haven't seen that, there'll be a link somewhere. I don't know, check it out if you haven't yet. But I have been a diehard Nintendo Switch fan since the first Nintendo Switch. In fact, if I'm honest with you, I'm 33 years old and I've been a diehard Nintendo fan since I started playing Nintendo back when some friends of mine had the Super Nintendo. But all that aside, for my entire life, I've been a Nintendo fan. So the Nintendo Switch 2 is a console that I've been looking forward to for years. I love PlayStation, I love Xbox, but Nintendo has always been my go-to. Now, I've heard a lot of people saying that the Nintendo Switch 2 is really just a Nintendo Switch Pro. And while in some ways, sure, I think that's fair. In other ways, look at the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5, or look at the Xbox One to the Xbox Series. Kind of a console to a pro version of the console, don't you think? A little bit? Maybe that's a stretch, but really what the Nintendo Switch 2 is an upgraded, faster, refined version of the original Nintendo Switch. And genuinely, I think there are enough upgrades to this handheld to make it worthy of the Switch 2 moniker. So Nintendo's kind of gone through cycles over the last couple years of huge successes and then relative failures and then huge successes again. I mean, you look at what happened with the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo absolutely killed it. And then the PlayStation 1 came out, they dropped the N64, and the N64 just didn't hold up to the PlayStation 1 in terms of graphics and in terms of what could be held on the cart. Now, although I'm nostalgic for that console, I think it's amazing, you had some weird choices, like that 3-handed controller. I don't know what that was, but still love it. Their next console, the GameCube, who a lot of people are nostalgic for, was also not as popular as the Xbox or the PlayStation 2. But then Nintendo hit success once again in a stratospheric way. The Wii is one of the most popular consoles of all time, and it exploded in popularity. But then they dropped the Wii U, a slightly updated version of the console, which many people, including myself, a Nintendo fan, initially thought was just an upgrade for your Nintendo Wii. But then, of course, as we all know, in 2017, the Switch came out, and that once again exploded in the same way that the Wii did. So I think what Nintendo did with the Switch 2 was really smart. Rather than going back into that cycle, reinventing the wheel and creating something that may or may not have been as successful as the original, they decided to just double down on what worked. And while sure, for some people that may seem like a pro upgrade, genuinely, I think this was the right way to go. But really, only time will tell. Until we have a couple years of this generation, we won't know for sure how successful this console is. But from what I'm hearing, on launch day, they sold like 3 million units. So I think it's gonna be okay. All that said, as someone who's owned the original Switch, the Switch Lite, and the Switch OLED now, the Switch 2 genuinely does feel like a generational upgrade, and I'm so excited about it. Does that mean if you have a Switch 1, you need to immediately upgrade to the Switch 2? No, but we'll talk about that later. So let's dive into the Switch 2. First of all, let's talk about the price. So there are 2 Switch consoles available at launch in the United States. You've got the standard one that comes by itself for $449, and you've got the Mario Kart bundle, which really is the same box except with a Mario Kart sticker on it, which sells for $499. It's a $50 difference, but when you consider the fact that the game itself is like a $70 game, it actually makes sense to buy this version because you're saving 20 bucks if you were gonna buy the game anyway. And I think for a lot of people, one of the biggest downsides of the Nintendo Switch 2 is that Mario Kart World is actually really the only new first-party game at launch. So it would make sense if the bundle that you wanna grab, and most of the bundles that sold were the Mario Kart bundle, because most people are gonna buy that game because it's the only game. The good news is this console is backwards compatible with the Switch. In fact, looking at the cartridges themselves, they're actually exactly the same except for the color. Well, at least from what I can tell physically. Now the question is, does the new one taste as bad as the old one? Let's find out. Okay, here we go. Yep. It's worse. Now, that seems really ridiculous that I just did that if you don't know what I'm talking about, but they actually flavor these cartridges so that kids won't eat them. And obviously, they still flavor the new ones. Wow, it's really not going away. I'm not even joking, like genuinely, it's not going away. So while the Switch 2 does use the same style cartridges as the original Nintendo Switch, there's a lot about this that is brand new. And that, of course, mainly is the design. And when it comes to a handheld console, honestly, the most important part is the screen. So let's go over that first. So right off the bat, the first thing that you will notice is that the new Nintendo Switch 2 screen is 7.9 inches and is significantly larger than the older Nintendo Switch OLED screen, which is actually bigger than the original Nintendo Switch. It's also brighter too, which is pretty cool. I don't know if you guys can really see that in the light, but it is brighter. The Switch 2 screen is 7.9 inches, so it's almost 8 inches. It's so close, and it's 1080p, which is a higher resolution than the original Switch. But those aren't the only upgrades. This is also a 120 Hz screen capable of VRR, which is variable refresh rate. So the refresh rate can change depending on what you're doing. It's also an HDR10 LCD, and I know some of you guys are like, LCD, that sounds like a downgrade from the OLED. And in some ways, technology-wise, I guess it is. Overall, though, when it comes to actual viewing experience, looking at them side by side, while yes, there are definitely pros to the OLED screen, overall, I prefer the larger and brighter and crisper new LCD display. Sure, the contrast in the OLED display might be slightly better, but genuinely, when you're looking at them side by side, I really think I prefer this LCD. Probably mainly because of the size, but it's also a great looking display. Oh, and like I mentioned earlier, this display is brighter. It gets up to 450 nits of peak brightness. I actually have a lot of handhelds, so it's easy to compare screen sizes, at least of modern handhelds, to the Nintendo Switch 2. Obviously, I've got the Switch 1 OLED. I have this very loud Lenovo Legion Go S Steam Deck Edition, which is not an OLED, it's an LCD, but it's also got an 8-inch screen, so actually compared to the Switch 2, is slightly bigger. It's not as much bigger as I thought. I mean, it's the same width, but it's slightly taller. Obviously, this is 7.9 inches and this is 8 inches, so it's not a huge difference, but there you go. I've also got the Ally X, but that's not even really worth comparing because the screen is significantly smaller than all of these. But I have to say that the Nintendo Switch 2 screen is the biggest screen of all of them except for the Lenovo Legion Go, and it's by a pretty big margin. The Steam Deck OLED screen, like the OLED screen on the Switch 1, looks amazing, but again, the size is just not there, and if you prefer larger screens or larger sizes, then you're gonna wanna go with the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm actually gonna drop a full comparison video between all the different handhelds to kind of talk you through which ones you should grab depending on your use case, but stay tuned for that. It is coming on the channel. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. But I say all that to say, not only does the Switch 2 screen live up to modern standards, it also surpasses them. It's large, it's beautiful, the color accuracy is solid, the variable refresh rate looks amazing, and the HDR is also pretty good. And that's all purely when you're playing this in handheld mode. We haven't talked about dock mode yet. Another huge improvement on the Nintendo Switch 2 is obviously the processor. This has a custom NVIDIA processor, which is significantly faster than the processor that you find in the older Nintendo Switch. Now, because it's a custom processor, it is kind of hard to compare it to other processors used in other mobile devices across the board. That said, the comparison that I've seen the most, at least on Reddit, is that this processor is similar to a GTX 1050 Ti, which for a tiny little handheld tablet, it's pretty good. Now, I know a lot of people are saying that the Steam Deck is kind of long in the tooth and then it's gonna get a replacement sooner than later. And while that is probably true, it still plays most AAA games. And the reason I bring this up is because the Switch 2 apparently is more powerful than the Steam Deck. Now, I've played games like Cyberpunk side by side on these two handhelds, and in my opinion, it does look better on the Switch 2. Obviously, it's an older game and neither of these consoles are playing the game in full high resolution mode. You're usually playing on medium to low settings, but still, I think it looks better on the Switch 2. It's also amazing that you can play a game like that on a Nintendo console. It's kind of wild. So in terms of performance, this does live up to the current modern standards. Will it be long in the tooth in like a year from now? Very possibly, but right now, and I think especially if you're just playing first-party Nintendo games, it's a big improvement. Now, in addition to the new processor, you also have 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM, which makes this thing pretty fast. Generally, very, very fast. I've had no problem with load times. It does load, but it's not like a crazy long time, even for something like Mario Kart World, where you're literally loading an entire world. But even then, a couple seconds, it's nothing crazy. Games like Cyberpunk, Hitman, Civilization, all of the more intensive games that you can play on this console have all been really, really smooth. Smoother than even my Steam Deck OLED and my Lenovo Legion Go S. Maybe that's because these games are optimized specifically for the console. That's probably exactly why. And these are more like PC gaming handhelds, but genuinely very, very smooth. Now, something that I didn't know about the Switch 2 until I actually got it in hand, and I probably should have known because I'd done some research on the console before I got it, is that if you plug in the Switch 2 into the dock actually has active cooling, which means that this can run faster in the dock than it can in handheld mode. Now, what active cooling means is that there's actually a fan inside the dock that's cooling cooling the console. So because of that, this console is able to run at higher clock speeds because it's not only getting power, but it's also getting cooling. So rather than being limited to 1080p on your TV, you're actually able to get up to 4K at 60 frames per second, which is pretty amazing. The original Switch, to my knowledge, did not have active cooling in the dock, and it only ran a little bit better and a little bit more smoothly because it was actually connected to power. So you weren't actually getting higher clock speeds, at least not visibly, or higher frame rates or higher resolution. You were just getting your display on the TV. With the Switch 2, you are kind of making this console more powerful when you plug it into the TV. It's awesome. It's so cool. Now we are, of course, going to get to gaming in a minute. All of these things don't matter unless you're actually playing games on the console, but I do want to go over the tech specs because we're reviewing the console. We're talking about the actual tech inside this thing. So I want to go over that first, and then we'll talk about how all of that translates to pretty great gameplay. Now, as we venture farther into this world of digital gaming where we don't actually own our own games, Nintendo did give us 256 gigabytes of internal storage to hold your games. Now, what I love about Nintendo is that they're really good at compressing the size of their games. So they're not like ridiculously large 100 gigabyte games like you have on the PS5 or the Xbox. Instead, you're getting much more reasonable game sizes, and so 256 gigabytes is a reasonable amount. You can actually fit like 10 to 12 games on there, a couple AAAs and a couple, smaller games. Obviously, if you're playing a lot of retro games, you can fit a bunch on there, no problem, but I fit Mario Kart World, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, actually not Zelda Tears of the Kingdom because this I have a cart for, but the other Zelda, Fast Fusion, I fit Civilization 7, I fit Mario Golf. Actually, Mario Golf I don't have a cart for, but I fit a lot on here without any issues. That being said, when I wanted to get Cyberpunk 2077, I did run out of space. And because of that, I had to upgrade my storage, which meant I had to buy a micro SD express card because you cannot use standard micro SD cards in your Nintendo Switch 2. Now that might sound frustrating and like, oh wow, Nintendo is making us pay more for a new micro SD card, but the micro SD express card is significantly faster than the regular micro SD, which means that games will run smoother off of the micro SD card, which is pretty great. Now for anyone wondering where you put this card or where you install it, it's actually in the back right there underneath the kickstand. You just kind of pop it in and it automatically installs. It's awesome. And I actually spent some time shopping for micro SD express cards because I was looking for the largest size that I could get from a legit brand that didn't cost $1 million. And what's crazy is that the Nintendo one, the one from Samsung, it's a co-branded one, actually was the cheapest, I think at $59.99 or maybe $69.99 for 256 gigabytes, which from what I could tell was the largest that I could get from a legit brand. The SanDisk one, at least I think it was SanDisk, was way more expensive for some reason, maybe because it was backlogged because so many people had pre-ordered it because of the Switch 2, but for whatever reason, I walked into Best Buy, grabbed this, worked out great. It's got a little Mario M on it, which is awesome, and it works amazingly well. Sure, would it have been nice if they had included more storage in the Switch 2? Absolutely. Do I think they should have? Absolutely. I think we should have at least gotten half a terabyte or even a terabyte, or I would have even paid more for a terabyte. But the good news is, if you have 6 to 10 games, you should be just fine not using an SD card. I mean, realistically, like how many games are you playing actively anyway? Probably 1 to 3, maybe. It's not a deal breaker, but I will say I wish Nintendo added more storage, and I wish there was larger storage sizes than 256 when it comes to micro SD Express, but I'm sure we'll get larger ones as time goes on. Some other out-of-the-box improvements that were included on the Nintendo Switch 2 that were not included on the Nintendo Switch 1 are Wi-Fi 6, obviously, because that wasn't really a standard back when the Nintendo Switch 1 came out, and also Bluetooth, which was eventually enabled on the Nintendo Switch 1, but came enabled on the Nintendo Switch 2. You can actually connect Bluetooth headphones to this device, which is amazing. Of course, you do have a headphone jack on the top, so if you still like using your aux cable, there you go. Actually, speaking of connectivity, in addition to the headphone jack, you also have a brand new USB-C port on top of the device. So now you've got two, one on the bottom, one on the top, which gives you a lot more flexibility when it comes to charging your handheld, depending on the way that you play, or plugging in an accessory like the Nintendo Switch camera, which I think is a waste of money. We'll talk about that later, but you plug that into the top and you're, video chatting. You can also use like any other USB-C webcam. Actually, while we're on the topic of USB-C ports, I want to point out one thing that I really like about the Switch 2. They redesigned the power brick for the Switch 2, so now it's actually removable. You've got a USB-C cord, which is pretty long. I mean, very, very long. And you've also got this power brick, which I believe is 65 watts or capable of 65 watts. 60 watts. Obviously, what's cool about this is that you can use another brick. It's also more compact, so you can throw it in a suitcase or a storage kit or something like that. You don't have to worry about like wrapping your cable, which is the worst and is bad for cables. So I really like this a lot. Continuing on with connectivity, because there's some more stuff I want to talk about. On the Nintendo Switch 2 dock, obviously it's redesigned. It's a little bit more rounded. There is a back plate, which you can see in the B-roll. I'm not going to grab it right now. And the back plate covers up a couple different ports. You've got a USB-C port for power. Just below that, you've got an HDMI port, obviously for video out. And then below that, you've actually got an Ethernet port. So now you can actually essentially hardwire your console and get really fast gaming speeds and download speeds. That's how I downloaded all of these games. I just dropped this in the dock, plugged it into my Ethernet, and I downloaded everything in minutes versus honestly like hours. So that was a really big improvement. Now, one thing that I feel like is a little disappointing about the Switch 2's dock is that on the outside of the dock, you have two USB Type-A ports. Now, this seems outdated. All of the ports on the Nintendo Switch are USB-C ports, and almost all the accessories, in fact, all of the accessories use USB-C ports. Now, to be fair, when you buy the Pro Controller and some other accessories, they come with one USB-C end on the cable and then one USB Type-A end on the cable so you can plug it into the dock. But why didn't they just go all USB Type-C? I have no idea why. Let me know in the comments down below if you know why. But that is a huge, in my opinion, oversight because everything that I have is USB Type-C except for the cables that I got with my Pro Controllers. Now, I know we've already covered charging, but I do want to talk really quick about the battery life of the Switch 2. The battery life of the Switch 2 is worse than the Switch 1, unfortunately, for a couple different reasons. One, you've got a more powerful processor. Two, the screen is bigger. And three, there's a lot more going on. I mean, with these new controllers, which we'll talk about, I feel like they probably are a bit more battery hungry than the original, and mainly because of the power in the screen. But genuinely, the battery life on this console isn't the best. Playing a game like Mario Kart World or Cyberpunk 2077, I got about 2 hours to 2.5 hours. But that's about what I got. Charging speeds, not super fast either. Unfortunately, you're gonna be sitting there for a minute while you're charging this up. And by minutes, I mean minutes and minutes. Probably close to an hour, which is not a huge deal, but there you go. So battery life is a downgrade, but again, you are getting a much more powerful console, so it's kind of a trade-off there. That said, if you're playing less intense games, like maybe you're playing some retro games or maybe some games that aren't as graphics heavy, you will get more battery life out of the handheld. It's not impossible to get 6 hours out of it if you're playing purely retro games. But now that we've covered all the tech inside the device and also in the dock, I want to talk about the actual physical design, the parts that you hold. So as we talked about, the screen on this device is significantly bigger than it was on the original Switch, and consequently, the body of this device had to get bigger. So right off the bat, you can see that there's a pretty large size difference. Obviously, the Switch 2 is not only taller than the Switch 1, but also wider. And that actually comes with a lot of benefits. The first is that the brand new Switch 2's controllers, or Joy-Cons, are significantly bigger, which means that they're actually way more usable in adult hands. Looking at the Switch 1 controller side by side with the Switch 2, you can see that there is a pretty large difference, specifically in the height department. They're actually pretty similar when it comes to width. And also, overall thickness too. They're actually apparently the same thickness, according to Nintendo. But that extra height gives you a lot of extra real estate and a lot of extra space for your fingers. So when you look at the Switch 1's controllers, it really felt dinky. I don't know if you've ever played like Mario Party or Mario Kart with a Joy-Con controller, but it sucks. This controller is so tiny, and while yes, the gyroscope's amazing and the rumble's incredible, the actual hand feel of this controller, especially for me with medium to large hands, is cramped. Compare that to the Switch 2's controller, which while yes, is still smaller than a regular controller like a Pro controller or a PlayStation controller, it feels significantly better in the hand. The face buttons are bigger. The back buttons, the SR and LR buttons, are actually clickable on the new controller, which is amazing. I said this in the unboxing and I still completely agree with it. I think the SL and SR buttons on the original Switch 1 could fit 6 times over in the Switch 2. It's amazing how large these buttons are in comparison. They're still not perfect, especially not when compared to like holding 2 Switch Joy-Cons or just a regular controller, but compared to what they used to be, it's night and day. In fact, on the old Switch, you actually had this attachment that you'd slide on to make the buttons bigger. On the Switch 2, you don't need that. You've literally just got these 2 buttons that work without the attachment. Another massive improvement is actually the joystick itself, or the analog stick. The analog stick on the Switch 2 is so smooth, so buttery, and apparently, while yes, there are still some concerns about drift, which I think is just the case for any analog stick, it is mitigated compared to the older Joy-Con controllers. How much better? We don't know until people start to experience Joy-Con drift. It could be months down the road, it could be years down the road. I'm sure it's gonna happen, but we'll have to wait and see how much better they are than the original Joy-Con controllers. Now, unfortunately, buying new Joy-Cons is not cheap. I actually bought a whole new set of Joy-Cons in my accessories video, which you guys should check out, link at the top of the screen. It was like $90 something, so it's not cheap at all, but I will say the new Joy-Cons do feel significantly more premium. They feel a lot better in the hand, and they feel more worth the price. While yes, the Joy-Cons on the Switch 1 are still cheaper than the Joy-Cons on the Switch 2, they feel a lot less premium. But those aren't the only improvements on the Joy-Con 2s. You've got a chat button, which is new for the Switch 2, which allows you to jump right into chat. I actually haven't used chat because no one I know has a Switch 2 yet, which is frustrating. But in addition to that, you've got a new R and L button and a new ZR and ZL button, which actually wrap all the way around the side of the controller, which make it a little bit easier to click with the sides of your finger, and they feel a lot better in the hand. But actually, the reason for that change isn't just because they feel better, but it's because you can use this Joy-Con in a new way. So like the Switch 1 Joy-Cons, which had a wrist strap attachment, which gave you extra buttons, the Switch 2 Joy-Cons do also feature a wrist strap attachment, but instead of giving you new buttons, it actually raises the sensor that's on the front of the Joy-Con off of the ground so that you can use it as a mouse, which I think is really cool, and it actually works right out of the box. Like, you can literally turn on the Switch 2, and the cursor actually pops up on screen as soon as you move the mouse on the ground. Now, I haven't used this mouse setup that much. I've used it for games like Civilization, but that's about it. So I don't know how compatible it is with other games. You can use it in Cyberpunk 2077 if you want as like a shooting control. And to be honest with you, it sucks compared to a standard mouse. I mean, let's be real. But the fact that they added this functionality into the console is really, really cool. It's surprisingly precise, and even though I'm complaining about it not being as good as a regular mouse, it still actually feels pretty good when you're using it. Now, as cool as this is, I still recommend using this on a mouse pad like a regular mouse because it can scratch up your table, and also it doesn't sense as accurately on a smooth white table like this, even though this should be fine, versus a mouse pad. The mouse pads were much more accurate in my opinion. Maybe your experience may vary. And while I'm playing Civilization, while yes, I can play it on my coffee table like this, I just prefer using the mouse pad. In fact, this is sort of the new killer feature on the Switch 2, other than the better performance, the bigger screen, and just the larger size of the console. This is a new addition to the Joy-Cons that separate it from the Switch 1. Is that enough of a new feature to make you run out to the store and buy a Switch 2? In my opinion, definitely not, but it is a nice addition. Another big change from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2 is, of course, the way that the Joy-Cons connect to the console. It's now magnetic versus the rail system. They actually feel more secure in this new setup than they did on the rail system because you've got more of a connection point running through the inside of the body of the console. You've got this whole ridge right here. Nintendo has also increased the size of the button that you use to remove the Joy-Cons, so now it's actually like a trigger, a small trigger kind of hidden behind the actual triggers. And while I thought this would be annoying and would get in the way a lot, I don't really notice it that much, and it makes it so much easier to pull these controllers off of the console because it's so much easier to find with my finger than this tiny little button on the back of the original Joy-Cons, which, to be fair, you get used to. Wow, yeah, these feel way more jiggly than the magnetic ones on the Switch 2. Like, this feels solid. Now, when playing in handheld mode, yes, this console is bigger, so that's better for larger-handed people, but in terms of the actual ergonomics, when it comes to the Joy-Cons themselves, very similar. They are a bit more rounded on the corners, and actually, just the entire shape is a bit more rounded, but it doesn't make a massive difference. The biggest difference for me is just the size, in terms of how it feels in the hand. I think the larger size is significantly better, and even my wife with smaller hands still said she prefers the larger size because it's easier to hold.
That's what she said.
I realize where a lot of your brains went with that, but hey, I'm being honest. Some other minor changes that I wanted to cover are the game card slot now opens from the back rather than from the front. It also has this nice little metal, I guess, sheath right here that kind of holds the game in place, which is a nice touch. Doesn't seem to make too much of a difference to me, but I'm sure they did it for a reason. One of the larger changes outside of the Joy-Cons and the size is, of course, the stand, which is now this U-shaped stand, and it actually rests in any angle that you'd like it. It goes all the way from flat against the back of the console to this angle, which is about 15-degree angle. I don't know exactly what the angle is, but I can tell you right now that compared to the Switch OLED, it's got a slightly better angle. Now, the Switch OLED obviously was a bit different because the stand was just this whole metal plate, whereas on this guy, it's this small, thin rod, which actually still feels pretty sturdy and still really sits in basically any position that you want it to, which I guess this one did too. Again, the microSD express card fits underneath the stand itself. They've also sort of inset the speakers inside the body of the device a bit more so you don't accidentally stick your fingers in there when you're trying to open the stand, like you would with the OLED version, which I did many a time. Speaking of the speakers, they sound great. This is actually a very, very loud handheld. I'm not gonna play any sounds here because I'm sure this video will get copyright struck immediately from Nintendo. Shout out to Nintendo for always being on the ball with copywriting the boys. Take it from me, the speakers sound great. They sound way better than the Switch 1, and I think this is a really, really good sounding and good looking console. Now, obviously the ergonomics and the hand feel of the Switch 2 are better than the Switch 1, but something else that was improved was actually the Pro Controller. And while yes, this Pro Controller looks a lot like the original Pro Controller, I mean, they're basically the same exact shape, there are some differences that make the new one a lot better. The biggest change is the fact that they've added two buttons on the back, a GL and GR button, these back paddle buttons, which are actually not available on the Switch console itself, or even on the Joy-Con, or even on the Joy-Con grip that comes with the console. The only way to get these programmable back buttons is on the Pro Controller or on the charging grip, which you have to buy separately. Now, what's cool about these programmable buttons is that you can set them as whatever you want, and you can set them for specific games, and they save to your profile. So whenever you turn this thing on and play a certain game, it knows what these buttons are going to be, which is cool. It's nothing crazy new, but it is cool. And especially when you compare this to something like the Steam Deck OLED or the Lenovo Legion Go or Ally X that have always had these rear programmable buttons, it makes the Switch 2 feel a bit more pro gamer, which it's not, but it does make you feel a bit more like you're a bit better at games than you probably are. Some other improvements on the new Pro Controller versus the old Pro Controller, which, by the way, still works on the Switch too. So if you have the Pro Controller, honestly, no need to upgrade unless you want some of these improvements like the back buttons. You've now got a headphone jack on the bottom of the controller, which you did not have at all on the old Pro Controller. The texture of the controller is now much smoother and much more matte feeling, which is different than the sort of textured plastic that you had on the original Pro Controller, which I think some people may prefer, but I actually kind of like this sort of smoother, softer, velvety feel. The other big change, the one that I like the most, besides just the chat button addition, which I actually don't like the most, I'm not talking about that, is the joysticks. The joysticks are now the same joysticks that you have in the Switch 2, and they feel incredibly smooth. I mean, listen to this. Sounds great. The old one, Ugh. Yuck. It's not that big of a deal, but it does feel significantly better, and I really think you will notice a difference when you have them in hand. The new Pro Controller, I think, is a welcome improvement over the original Pro Controller. Is it night and day? No, but it does add a lot of really nice changes, and I think in the hand it just feels better because of that new texture. That said, it is very expensive. It's like 85 bucks, and you can still use the old Pro Controller, so buy it if you want it. But all of that said, I know we've done a huge deep dive into the console and haven't really talked about the games, but now we're gonna talk about the games. So if you remember, like I mentioned at the beginning of the review, the only full first-party game that launched with the Switch 2 is Mario Kart World. Now, I've always been a relatively big Mario Kart fan, never enough to where I feel like I need to 100% every game, but enough to where I feel like I'd buy every game and play every game, at least beat it. Mario Kart World is an excellent improvement over Mario Kart 8. It's different. Mario Kart 8 was a love letter to all of the previous Mario Karts. It had all of those classic tracks, and after all the DLC was downloaded, you had hundreds of tracks. It was an incredible, incredible game, and it featured all of the things that you've wanted from previous Mario Karts. Mario Kart World is a brand new take on the game. While it still does feel like Mario Kart, it adds a whole new open world, which I thought was gonna be corny at first, but actually is awesome, and it adds some new game modes. You've obviously got Grand Prix, which we all know and love. However, unlike previous Grand Prix, it's not 4 different race circuits that are all closed circuits. Instead, it's 4 different areas that are connected with highways, and each race takes place in one area, then you drive along sort of a highway to the next area, and you finish the race in the next area, and then the next race starts off where you left off, and then goes into the next area. So it's kind of a mashup of courses versus playing closed circuits, which I think some people like, some people don't like. I was fine with it because as much as I am nostalgic about the previous courses, I played a lot of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I feel like I'm good on those courses, at least for now, and I'm certain that DLC will bring back some of those popular courses. You do have, I mean, you got Rainbow Road, you got Moo Moo Farms, you got a lot of the classics, and if you really want to play them as just closed courses, you can play Versus mode, but Grand Prix mode, a little bit different than what you're probably used to. My favorite addition though, besides the open world and besides the fact that you can do sort of challenges within the open world and unlock new skins and things like that, is Knockout Tour. Now, Knockout Tour is really cool because basically you start out with 24 racers, because now this game supports 24 racers, and every lap, essentially, you have to be in a certain position, and everyone behind that position gets knocked out. So it goes from like 24 racers down to like, I think it's 12 or 16 or something like that, then down to 8, then down to 4, and then you just gotta be the winner. It's really cool, and I have a blast with it. I haven't beaten really any of them in 150cc. I shouldn't admit that yet. I've been focusing on Grand Prix, that's why, but it is a blast. Me and my wife play it every single night, and we've loved it. Grand Prix has been also a blast. I've beaten every single one, 150cc. Unfortunately, as of right now, there is no 200cc, at least from what I can tell. 200cc is above my pay grade though, so I'm fine with it, but I know for people who are more serious about the game, it would be a nice addition. Other gameplay modes are time trials versus race, you know, battle mode, things like that, all your standard Mario Kart modes. But generally, I would say that this game is a really good new version of Mario Kart. It doesn't replace Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Obviously, that game is backwards compatible, so you can still play it on your Switch 2, but in my opinion, it doesn't replace that game. It's more of the next evolution of Mario Kart, and I think they did an amazing job with it. Now, that is sort of the main first-party brand new game that's only available on the Switch 2. There are other games, like upgraded versions of the 2 Zelda games that we all know and love, like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. You've now got the Nintendo GameCube section, if you have the Plus expansion pack of Nintendo Online. You've got a Switch 2 version of Hitman, World of Assassination, which I actually have yet to play. You've got Fast Fusion, which is really fun, and it's only 15 bucks, so not a bad game. You've of course now got Cyberpunk Ultimate Edition, which is pretty amazing on the Switch 2. We kind of covered that earlier. The fact that you can run that game on the Switch 2, incredible. You've got the Switch 2 version of Civilization 7, which I've really enjoyed, and I've been playing a lot with the mouse mode. And you've got the weirdly expensive Welcome Tour, which everyone says should be a pack-in, and I completely agree. It's a $10 game. It shows you different features of the console. Basically like Wii Sports, except boring. Not boring, it's just not as fun. But as I'm sure you've heard from other reviews, you do have to own a lot of the extra accessories in order to be able to complete the game. You need a Pro Controller, you need the camera, you need a 120 hertz capable screen, a lot of things that you will need that you may not have initially. So buy that game at your own risk. It's fine. It's not the best. But I will say, as an early adopter and only playing this for about a week at this point, of course this is my initial review, not my full review, Mario Kart World is excellent, and I think it's enough to get most people by for at least a couple weeks to a month or two. And the fact that this is so backwards compatible, you can play your Switch 1 library, you can play the new versions of Zelda. And not only that, if you play Switch 1 games, they do generally look better on the Switch 2 because it's a more powerful console. The load times are better. Things seemed crisper, at least for me. It's 1080p versus 720, so that was a plus. And then of course 4K if you play it on your TV. Obviously not all games are optimized optimized for the Switch 2. They're very specific Switch 2 optimized games. It should play non-Switch 2 games though a little bit smoother than the Switch 1, which is nice. So there is a huge library of Switch 1 games that you can play is what I'm getting at. I won't go into the price of Switch 2 games. I feel like that's been done to death. They're expensive. I hate it. Everyone hates it. $80 games is just insane. That's the reason why you'd buy the Mario Kart bundle of the Switch 2 versus the standard Switch 2, because you get it for $50 versus $80. There you go. It is just a download code, but at least you get it for $50. And playing games in 60 FPS that you couldn't play before, like Switch 1 games, is really cool. It just feels better overall, and I think I'm gonna go back and play some of the games that I never fully beat. Like I never fully beat Tears of the Kingdom. I know, never fully beat it. You guys might have seen some of the B-roll. I barely got out of the starting world, but hey, now I'm going to play the Switch 2 edition, and it's going to look way crisper, and it's going to be a fun game for me because I haven't played it yet, so I'm excited about that. Another reason, in addition to only playing this for a week, that I don't want to do a full review of the Switch 2 yet is that the library is just so small. It's not fair to review it with one true Switch 2 game out. So I will be updating this review in a month when I've had a full month with this handheld, and then probably again in 6 months to a year or whatever. Kind of giving you guys my follow-up thoughts as we go. This is my initial review, initial impressions of the handheld after playing it for hours and hours and hours, a full week. But man, I've got to say, in that week, I've loved it. This has been an amazing experience. It is truly a next-gen version of the Switch 1. It feels like the upgrade from PS4 to PS5, which some people considered small. And while no, this is not like a night and day improvement, this is not going from the GameCube to the Wii in terms of new styles of play or input methods, but it does feel like a really great improvement over the original. And I love that Nintendo, I wouldn't say played it safe, but they tried not to change what was working. I think that was the right way to go. And I think this is really the only way they could have gone and not pissed everybody off. I'm happy with it. I think it's a worthwhile upgrade. If you already have a Switch 1 and you want to upgrade to a Switch 2 and you have the money for it, I say go for it. The price is probably not going to drop anytime soon. Obviously, they raised the prices because of the tariffs, but realistically, the prices were going to be high anyway, and they're probably going to stay high for a very long time. So don't expect any sales for this guy for a long time. So if you want to buy it, if you can find it, I'd say buy it now. If you have a Switch 1 and you're like, do I really need to upgrade to the Switch 2? Realistically, you don't. Unless you want to play some games that are only available on the Switch 2, there's no reason to upgrade from the Switch 1. It's a great console. Nintendo consoles are never really the kind of consoles that you buy for cutting-edge graphics and cutting-edge tech. If you want that, you're probably a PC gamer, or maybe you have a PS5 or something like that. While the graphics are better, while the frame rates are better, while it's a faster console, you can still play all of the Nintendo games that you're going to want to play on the Switch 1 and be just fine. You won't be able to play Mario Kart World, but that's the only game right now on the Switch 2. So in my opinion, I think it's worth buying a Switch 2, even at this price. I think that's going to be the price for a long time. I think that's the price you're going to have to pay if you want one. So whether you buy it now or later, you know, I don't think it matters too much. Just depends on how much money you got in your pocket and how much you're willing to spend. And hey, if you were one of those people that didn't have a Switch, then the Switch 2 is a great console to buy because not only do you get Switch 2 games, but you can play all the Switch 1 games that you never got to play before. In fact, better versions of those games that you never got to play before. So I love this thing. Does it have its problems? Sure. But in my opinion, they're few and far between. But hey, at this point in the video, I would love to know your thoughts on the Nintendo Switch 2 and whether you're planning to grab this console for yourself. Let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. I'd also love to know if you have one and what your experience has been. Let me know those comments as well. Again, if you want a chance to win a Nintendo Switch 2 Mario Kart edition for yourself, check out the core badge in the top of the description below. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and I'll see you all in the next one.